Bastian Verweek was still alive. He was a bloody, broken mess, his clothes and hair virtually burned off him from the cutter's death blast. Though I loathed him for what he had done, I felt pity as I saw him. His eyes were still yearning. They seemed to light up with joy as they saw me approach. He reached out a bloody hand. He thought I was coming to rescue him. I confess here now that I hate myself for what I did. That I despised Verweek does not excuse it. He was an odious wretch who had cost me more dearly than I could say. But he was still a servant of the Inquisition. And damn him, he worshipped and trusted me. But there was no alternative. I made the right decision. I had released Cherubel because cruel revolt simply had to be stopped for the good of mankind. Now, Cherubel had to be stopped, and I was forced to make a similarly hard choice. I will pay in time, in the hereafter, when I come before the Golden Throne. I knelt beside him. His yearning face looked up at me. Damn, that yearning puppy look. Master? Bastian, are you a true servant of the Emperor? I am. And will you serve him in any way you can? I will, Master. And are you pure? Foolish question. Verweek's damned purity had led to all his mistakes. His puritanical piety had made him a liability in the first place. But he was pure. As pure as any man could be. I placed my hands on his chest and made my fingers wet with his blood. Then I daubed certain runes and markings on his forehead and face, on his neck, his heart, muttering seldom heard imprecations from the Malus Codicium. What are you doing? He wavered. Damned questions even now. What must be done? You are doing the Emperor's work, Bastian. A scream howled out of the station. Andronicus appeared, running terrified towards the lake. His hands were on fire, dripping with white-hot molten metal. Cherubel had finally found the strength to melt the Aquila. Still screaming, the poor old man plunged into the icy lake, the water steaming and spitting around his agonized hands. Cherubel's deadly star came shimmering down the beach towards me. Forgive me, Verweek, I said. Oh, of course, Master. For what? He added suddenly. Bellowing incantations of binding, the litany of servitas, the wards of entrapment, I met Cherubel head on, the rune staff glittering with power. In servitam abduco, I bind thee fast forever, to this host. What in the name of hell happened here? Fishig bellowed, his gun raised as he ran towards me. Everything. Nothing. It's over, Fishig. But what is that? He asked. The demon host floated a few centimeters off the ground next to me. I had fashioned a leash from my belt, tied off around Viveric's scorched, distended throat. I have trapped a demon, Goodwin. He is bound and cannot harm us now. But Viveric? Dead. We must honor him. He has given his all to the Emperor. Fishig looked at me warily. How do you know the means to bind a demon, Eisenhorn? He asked. I have learned much in this Inquisitor's job. I know these things. Fishig took a step back. Viveric, he began. He was dead before you used his body, wasn't he? I didn't answer. 3 shuttles were powering in across the lake, preparing for landing. The reinforcements summoned by Elizabeth had finally arrived. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. We are back with my favorite character, next to John Grammaticus, in all of Warhammer. Fight me on John Grammaticus. Eisenhorn, the book that got me into this whole crazy universe that we call Warhammer. Eisenhorn is such a magnanimous, interesting character. You know, I enjoy the comments down below because he's very polarizing. Yes, I am well aware that in later novels he is vindicated and called to sainthood. Well, guess what, friends? There are a lot of people out there who may have done some great things in the name of goodness, but if you peek too far behind the curtain of their magnanimity, they're not that great. But that's what makes good fiction so compelling. So we've said it many a time on this channel. Good fiction is rooted in reality. That's what causes us to connect to the story, to want to root for the characters, to care about what happens for them. Granted, because of the work I do, you know, I am a corporate trainer. I teach people how to be better at their jobs. You know, I do a lot of studying of business. I listen to a lot of business podcasts, read a lot of business news, understand what's going on in the world that my sales professionals and executives are dealing with so that I can help them better. Oh, but reality is just, it's too much sometimes. Sometimes we need to be lifted out of reality to step back and honestly better examine it. So I watch a lot of fiction. I read a lot of fiction. I obviously am a fan of animation and that kind of thing because deep thought can still occur in the world of fiction. It just has to be delicately connected to how people really are. And humans are not creatures of polarization. We are not black and white, for lack of better terming, right now. We're complicated. And Eisenhorn is complicated. And I think, at least for me, that's what makes him such a compelling character. As we catch up with him in this portion of the story, if you haven't, you know, seen the other parts of the series, which one of these days I'm going to learn how to do the links and be like, hey, go listen to this. But I'm not that good yet. One day I will be. It's not today. But Eisenhorn is not purely good. And he's not purely evil. He is someone who does what he has to do to protect what is most valuable to him. You have to remember, the Inquisitors are like the Space Marines in how they're trained. They are taken in as youngsters, like, little bitty things, and brought up in a certain way. So they are indoctrinated with a set of beliefs and values, and that becomes what's most important to them. That's why they take them when they're young, because you can't change the mind of a 30-year-old. But, 5-year-old, yeah, we can work with that. So they get them young. And the Emperor, the Imperium of Mankind, what has been established post-Horus Heresy, that is the world that Eisenhorn knows. And when he is younger, he is completely puritanical. There is no gray area when he's young. But experience teaches him that sometimes you have to use the tools of the enemy in order to achieve a greater end. But there's the rub. The Emperor, Malcador the Sigillite, the rules of the Inquisition, the rules of the Imperium of Mankind, you do not dabble with chaos. That is a hard and fast rule. The Emperor himself put down the world of one of his own sons, Lorgar, for breaking that. Embarrassed him in front of all his brothers. Had Perturabo build a whole coliseum so he could make one speech to one son in front of all his other sons and embarrass that boy to death, to the point that he turned against him and turned a whole bunch of other legions as a result. That's how serious not dabbling in chaos is. Now, granted, and thank you, viewer, who brought this up, one of the Emperor's mistakes, honestly, was not being honest with his sons about what chaos really was, or even humanity. I can imagine part of the reasoning behind that, which is kind of what some old church traditions do. Like, back when certain churches used to print the Bible for you and you did not get a version, you came to church to hear it in Latin. What they said was, we are protecting you from things you ought not read. Let us translate it for you so that you get what you need and not what will hurt you. Well, yeah, that's great, but humans are naturally inquisitive, and telling a human no is almost like begging them to go searching. It's opposite day in most people's heads. And when we're told we can't do something, that kind of makes it a little more enticing, which is why the Horus Heresy happened. But bringing it back around to Eisenhorn, he wasn't out searching for chaos. As an Inquisitor, he knows what chaos is. He knows that demons exist. He knows what the alien is. That is his job to know. He says that to Fishig. I'm an Inquisitor. I'm supposed to know this stuff. Yeah, knowing and using are two different things. But sometimes you have to use the tools of your enemy to best your enemy. And Eisenhorn was caught in a very precarious situation with the demon-possessed, chaos-possessed Titan, Cruor Volt, marching across the planet. If that thing had gotten off-world, it could have laid waste to hundreds of worlds, because chaos. And to destroy chaos, it honestly takes chaos, and Eisenhorn knows that. But when he first trapped Cherubel, there was no Chaos Titan around. He basically stole him from someone else. Another Inquisitor who had trapped him. It's complicated because humans are complicated. I like to look at real world figures to help us understand where some of that humanity comes in. Where is this concept of such a complex person doing what is objectively wrong, but using it for the greater good? I have a really good one. Stay with me. Do you know of Oskar Schindler? He is one of my favorite historical figures, yet another complex human being who honestly wasn't that great of a moral human. Wasn't that great of a person until World War II. So, a little bit of history on the man Oscar Schindler. If you've not seen Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg, highly recommend it. Get your tissues, because when each Zach Perlman starts playing that violin and that little girl in the red coat starts walking across the screen, you're going to lose your mind. That might be one of those movies that is going into antiquity in modern times, because I'm not sure there is as much study on the Great Wars as there used to be. But those are very valuable lessons to humanity on what we ought not do, things we just don't need to do again. But Oscar Schindler is someone who was he was an unwitting hero of the war, even though his roots were rather sketchy. So during the war, there's occupation. The Nazis, yeah, I said that incorrectly on purpose because YouTube be checking how you say things, marching across Europe and eventually into Poland. Before the war, Oscar Schindler himself was a failed businessman and just a horrible husband. He was married throughout the events of Schindler's List. However, he wasn't exactly faithful to his wife. And they were not living together because he kept having failed business venture after failed business venture. He'd get investment, go try to do a thing, lose all the money, end up in debt. Wash, rinse, repeat. That's just how it was. But historically, for certain kinds of people, the greatest way to make a profit is war. And that's something that's examined in Schindler's List. Very well done movie. Very well done. Liam Neeson, Ray Fiennes. I mean, seriously, like you need to stop what you're doing right now and go watch that movie. If you're over 18 and you got your wits about you, it's deep. It goes all the way in, but so good. I warned you. But Oscar Schindler, when the war came to Poland, he found opportunity in enamel works. What the German regime had done with the Jewish population was oust them from their homes and put them into ghettos, overcrowding them, in 1 or 2 rooms, having 3, 4, 5, 6 families living in there, 15, 20 people living in a couple of rooms, no privacy, no sanitation, not great access to food, of course, no access to health care, just absolute humiliation. And they were basically selling them to local factories who were producing goods and services for the German army during the war. Oscar Schindler takes advantage of this. He knows there's business opportunity due to war. So he opens a factory and buys a workforce from the Germans. He makes a deal with the local head German officer to basically buy people to work in his factory, because he doesn't pay those people. He pays their wages directly to the German army. They cut a deal with them. So they're not making any money, but they get to get out of the ghetto every day. Ugh. Yeah, that's a whole other thing to talk about. And his factory does very well. He moves into a home that was more than likely previously owned by a Jewish family that had been taken from them by the German regime. He attends parties. He entertains high-ranking officers of the Nazi party. He wears the Nazi pin. He joins the party. He is all in and making all the money. He's living the good life. He's living it so well that even at some point his wife comes to visit him when she hears of his success. Too bad he's still cheating all over the place on her. He's a terrible man. It's how he is. Not a judgment call, just letting you know. He ain't great. Because the more money he made, the more access to the things he got. That's how that works. Not a judgment call, it's just how it works. But something changes in Oscar Schindler. Eventually, a concentration camp is opened up, and his workforce is moved from the ghetto that's nearby his factory to Krakow, which is further out in the countryside. And he complains to the runner of said concentration camp, like, you're taking my workforce. What the heck, man? And they cut another deal. But in that moment, Oskar Schindler changes. He has made so much money from his enamel works. But he's confronted with the cost of his profit. He is a war profiteer and eventually going to be labeled a war criminal for what he's done. And I'm going to try not to cry here because it gets real beautiful. He works out a deal to buy all of his workers that were in his factory and move them into a munitions factory and keep them there in his own sub-camp, basically, to make munitions for the war because enamel works were no longer the big thing. He's made more money than he's ever seen in his lifetime and will ever see again. And one by one, he purchases all of the children. He purchases the women. He purchases their husbands, their fathers, their mothers. He puts entire families back together and brings them into his munitions factory to wait out the war. I don't know when or what changed in Oskar Schindler, but the fact remains that he did that. And when he opens his munitions factory, he vows to not produce a single munition that will actually fire right. He makes excuse after excuse after excuse to the German army as to why the bullets won't go straight, as to why the guns are jamming, as to why the mortars won't mortar. And he protects those people. He feeds them. He clothes them. He houses them. It's something like 1,200 people he saves. And right as the war ends and liberation comes to Poland, he runs out of money. There's a beautiful scene. Woo, I'm tearing up, man. Woo, it's emotional. So this is what good fiction does. Although Oskar Schindler, a real person, we're just using him as an example. At the end of Schindler's List, like a spoiler warning for a 30-year-old movie, we see the families that he saved gather around and they understand what's about to happen to him, because as far as anyone outside of that mini camp he's running to produce munitions for the German army, he's a war profiteer, he's an enslaver of people, he's a runner of a concentration camp, he's a war criminal, he's a member of the party. The American army and the Allies are going to hunt him down and take him out for what he's done. But every single person in that camp signs a letter proclaiming the goodness that Oskar Schindler did. They pull out fillings that are gold, find gold earrings, whatever they can, and make a ring for him so that he remembers them. And Oskar Schindler, whose wife actually joined him at his mini camp in his humanitarian work. It's the only time he was a good husband was when he was running a concentration camp. Good God. They're shoveled into a car, put into prisoners' clothes, and whisked away, hopefully to become safe. It's an absolutely incredible story. Why use that man in relation to Eisenhorn? Because sometimes you have to use the tools of the enemy to do something great. I am not philosopher enough to comment on the morality of that. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. But what I do know is that there were generations saved because of what Oskar Schindler did. He did start out using those people. He was in with the Nazi parties. He entertained them. He bought them off. He literally bought these people twice. The first time was for pure profit. But then he used the weapons of the enemy against them. Although they think, the Nazis, that he's doing something for them, he's saving a bunch of people. How many of us could do that? Because he did it at great peril to himself, to flip on the party. Now, granted, the Germans lost the war, so he made the right decision. Saving a human life is the right thing to do. But in the process of what he was doing, he broke a lot of moral rules out there. And he was hunted down as a criminal. But he was so honored by the Jewish community that he's actually buried in Israel, and there's a tree planted on his grave because of what he did. Not too many people like an Oskar Schindler have existed in our time. To see someone who, by all rights, did everything wrong in his life, to end up doing something so good, that's a really compelling story. And using that kind of groundwork to build amazing fictional characters is what brings us to stories like Eisenhorn. Now, Eisenhorn, let's be real, let's flip it. Eisenhorn is an indoctrinated youth who is to serve the emperor, and he learns nefarious ways along his path. But like Schindler, he eventually learns how to use the tools that were meant for evil to do something good. There is still mixed usage in there. How do you justify buying people? Even if you're saving them, like just the purchasing of a person. How do you justify, Eisenhorn, that before that demon was doing anything to you, that you just trapped him and kept him at your house for 50 years? How do you justify that? Why'd you do it? Because initially, Oskar Schindler wasn't setting out to do anything good. He was setting out for profit. Eisenhorn didn't trap that demon because he was going to need him one day. Come on. But the way the universe works and how things become connected is far too complex to simply dissect in one 20-30 minute video. But I think what stories like Eisenhorn should make us do is sit back and understand, examine these kinds of characters and people throughout history. The greatest among us have a story behind them that you probably don't want to hear. I mean, if you dig too deep into the greatest people in history, you won't find some stuff. Ain't nobody out there perfectly pure. Every time somebody gets canceled, like, look, I mean, I get it. Cancel culture's thing. It's not going anywhere. But I'm like, dadgum, I mean, I hate to break it to you, but everybody's terrible on some level. Everybody's terrible on some level. But even when humans are terrible, we have the capacity to do really good things as well. And that's why I love the story of Eisenhorn. He recognizes that some of the things he has done are terrible. But in his heart of hearts, he means to do good. And sometimes the intention to do good is enough. I chained the demon host in the hold and spent 10 hours inscribing the area with the correct sigils of containment. Cherubel was still zombie-like and dumb, as if entranced. The severe trauma of its binding was still lingering, and for a while it was docile. On each visit, I triple-checked the sigils and, where necessary, refreshed them. I used a quill to ink dye to permanently mark in the runes I had painted on its flesh and blood. That was chilling work. Viveric's body had healed and was now glossy and healthy. His eyes were closed, but his face was still that of a young inquisitor, though the boy's forehead was beginning to bulge with the vestigial numb horns that were sprouting from the bone. On the 9th day, it opened Viveric's eyes. The blank wrath of Cherubel shone out. It had finally come through the terrible rigors of binding, rigors made worse by the crude and rudimentary way I had performed the rite. "He wants you dead," were the first words it spoke. Am I speaking to Bastion or Cherubel? "Both," it said. I nodded. "Nice try, Cherubel. I know Viveric is gone from that body." "He hates you, though. I tasted his soul as he passed out of this body and I passed in. He knows what you did, and he's taken that dread knowledge to the afterlife with him." "The Emperor protects." "The Emperor craps himself at the sound of my name," it responded. I slapped its face hard. "You are bound, Lord Demon Prince, and you will be respectful." Floating off the dirty hold floor, wrenching at its securing chains, Cherubel began to scream obscenities to me as I left. And that is where we are going to leave Eisenhorn this week. I think next week I'm going to pick back up with Fabius Bile, because I finally have figured out my schedule where I can have time to sit back and read. Reading is just such a good way to pass time. I used to not do it as much as when I was younger because I read a lot for my job. Like I study for a living. If you're going to teach people, you gotta read, you gotta study. So I wasn't as into it as I was in my younger years. But it's important. You might notice that I use a lot of words. It's said that Shakespeare had a working language of something like 30 to 50,000 words. The average male has like a working language of like 5,000 words, 6,000. And the average female, it's like double that, like 12,000 words. The more words you have, the better you can express yourself. Now, I think I said that in a video I did a while back. Well, not maybe like a week ago, at the time of filming this anyway. That part of the reason I'm able to do what I do is I'm a good communicator. If there's any skill you want to work on your communication skills. If you don't know how to work on them, read. Reading will build your communication skills because you will learn new words and new ways of expressing with those words. Deep bit of introspection today, deep examination. I didn't intend to go that deep, but that is the power of a good story. It makes you think, it makes you consider, it makes you wonder. And that's what compels us to keep reading, to keep playing, to keep investing. There are so many great stories out there. I got content for years. It's so many great stories. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really appreciate everyone who takes time to visit my channel, watch my videos, comment. I'm trying to become better at this. But it's one step at a time. One step at a time. So I hope you really enjoyed that story. It's one of my favorites. I hope you enjoyed the commentary. Please definitely comment because I always love the banter down below. And subscribe. And I will see you, hopefully, in the next one. Bye.